The cabin sat like a forgotten tomb in the Montana wilderness, its windows black with frost and 20 years of abandonment. Sarah Chen clutched the rusty key with numb fingers, her 5-year-old daughter Emma shivering beside their broken-down Honda. They had nowhere else to go. The eviction notice, the empty bank account, the string of dead-end jobs, all of it had led to this moment. But Sarah wasn't just another desperate single mother. She was a former forensic accountant who'd walked away from her career after exposing corruption that nearly got her killed. Now, as she pushed open the cabin door, her trained eye immediately caught what others would miss: the expensive security system hidden behind rotting wood, the reinforced walls, the subtle signs that this wasn't just any mountain retreat. Inside, beneath loose floorboards, she found something that made her blood run cold: bank statements, cryptocurrency wallets, and a letter addressed to her from the grandmother she thought had died decades ago. The letter contained 2 words that changed everything: "They're coming." What secret had her family been hiding that was worth killing for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled through the pines as Sarah stared at the handwriting that should have been impossible. Her grandmother, Mei Chen, had supposedly died when Sarah was 7. Her mother had been adamant about it: cancer, quick and devastating. There had been a funeral. Sarah remembered the closed casket, her mother's tears. "Mummy, it's cold," Emma whispered, pressing closer to her side. Sarah forced herself to focus. The immediate concern was survival. The cabin's interior was a study in contradictions: dust-covered furniture that looked decades old, yet underneath she spotted climate control systems that were state-of-the-art. The refrigerator was ancient on the outside, but hummed with modern efficiency. Someone had been maintaining this place while making it appear abandoned. She guided Emma to what appeared to be the living room, where a stone fireplace dominated one wall. Kindling and logs were stacked nearby, dry despite the cabin's apparent neglect. As she knelt to start a fire, her fingers found something odd about the hearthstones. One was loose. Behind it, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was a cell phone. Not just any phone, a satellite model that would work even in this remote location. It was warm, recently charged. A note was taped to it: "For emergencies only." They monitor everything else. Emma had curled up on an old couch, exhaustion finally claiming her small body. Sarah covered her daughter with a musty blanket and returned to the floorboards where she'd found the documents. Her forensic training kicked in as she spread the papers across a wooden table. The bank statements showed regular deposits over the past 15 years, small amounts, never more than $9,000 at a time, just under the federal reporting threshold. Classic money laundering technique. But the source accounts were what made her hands shake. They traced back to shell companies she recognized from her last case, the one that had forced her into hiding 3 years ago. The cryptocurrency wallets contained addresses and private keys. Even without accessing them, she could see from the transaction histories printed alongside them that the combined value had to be in the millions, maybe tens of millions. But it was the third document that made her breath catch: a birth certificate for her mother, Lisa Chen, showing Mei Chen as the mother. The birth date was wrong, 20 years earlier than what Sarah had always known. Her mother hadn't been born in 1950, she'd been born in 1930. A photograph fell from between the pages. Sarah recognized her mother immediately, though she looked exactly as Sarah remembered her from childhood. Standing next to her was an older Asian woman, May, presumably, but the photo's date stamp showed it was taken just 5 years ago. Her mother had been lying about everything: her age, her mother's death, their family history. But why? Sarah's phone buzzed, startling her. No signal should reach this far into the wilderness, yet the notification showed a text from an unknown number: "Welcome home, Sarah. Your grandmother wanted you to have this information when you were ready. You have 48 hours before they realize you've found it. Use them wisely." The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. Sarah looked at her daughter, innocent, trusting, depending on her for everything, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. For 3 years, she'd been running, hiding, taking whatever work she could find to keep them alive. She'd been powerless, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid. Now, surrounded by evidence of her family's secrets, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her forensic accounting days, the thrill of unraveling a complex financial puzzle. And this time, the stakes weren't just about exposing corruption. This time, it was about survival. The law office of Henderson and Associates sat wedged between a vintage bookstore and a coffee shop that had seen better decades. Sarah pushed through the heavy glass door, the scent of old leather and paper hitting her immediately. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd been filing documents since the Carter administration, barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Sarah Chen for Mr. Henderson," she said, clutching the certified letter that had arrived 3 days ago. The woman's fingers clicked across the keyboard with mechanical precision. "He's expecting you. 3rd door on the right." Robert Henderson looked exactly like Central Casting would order for a small-town lawyer. Rumpled suit, wire-rimmed glasses, and a handshake that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His office was a monument to organized chaos, with towers of manila folders creating a paper skyline across every available surface. "Miss Chen, thank you for coming." He gestured to a worn leather chair across from his desk. "I have to admit, this is one of the more unusual cases I've handled in 30 years of practice." Sarah settled into the chair, its springs protesting under her weight. "I still don't understand how someone I've never heard of could leave me anything. My mother never mentioned having a mother-in-law." Henderson adjusted his glasses and pulled a thick folder from beneath a stack of others. "That's not entirely surprising. Mylin Chen was a private woman. She came to see me about 18 months ago, very specific about her wishes, said she'd been watching you from a distance." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Watching me?" She knew about your journalism work, your recent divorce, even that you'd been laid off from the Tribune. Henderson opened the folder and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the desk. "She was quite proud of you." Sarah stared at the image. A woman in her 70s with steel-grey hair and eyes that held the same determined set as her own. She was standing in front of a rustic cabin, mountains rising behind her like ancient sentinels. "She lived alone up there for nearly 40 years, Henderson continued. "No electricity, no running water, no phone. Completely off the grid. The only reason I knew her was because she'd come down twice a year to handle some business matters." "What kind of business matters?" Henderson hesitated, his fingers drumming against the desk. "She was very specific that I not discuss the details until you'd been to the property. Said you'd need to see it for yourself to understand." Sarah picked up the photograph, studying the woman's face for any familiar features. "How did she even know I existed?" "She hired a private investigator about 5 years ago. Thomas Chen was her son, your father-in-law. Though I gather the marriage ended before you could meet her. She'd lost touch with him after some kind of family dispute, but she wanted to know about his family." Henderson leaned back in his chair. "She was particularly interested when she learned about your investigative work. Said you had the gift for uncovering truth." The phrase sent another shiver through Sarah. She'd heard similar words before, usually right before someone tried to bury a story she was working on. Henderson reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a heavy brass key attached to a leather cord. "The cabin is about 2 hours north of here, up in the Cascade foothills. There's also this." He handed her a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Inside the box, nestled in faded velvet, was an ornate silver locket. Sarah lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. The front was engraved with Chinese characters she couldn't read, and when she pressed the clasp, it opened to reveal not photographs, but what looked like a hand-drawn map. "She said you'd know what to do with it when the time came," Henderson said quietly. Sarah closed the locket with a soft click. This is insane. I don't know anything about surviving in the wilderness. I can barely keep a houseplant alive. She thought of that. Henderson smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. The cabin's been stocked with enough supplies to last several months, and she left detailed instructions for everything. How to start the generator, where to find fresh water, even how to contact the outside world if necessary. If necessary? Henderson's expression grew serious. Miss Chen, your grandmother was convinced that certain people might not be happy about her decision to leave you the property. She was very emphatic that you tell no one where you're going. Sarah felt the weight of the key in her palm. What aren't you telling me? She paid me to give you exactly what I've given you. Nothing more, nothing less. But I will say this, Mei Lin Chen was one of the sharpest people I've ever met, and she was genuinely frightened of something. Be careful up there. As Sarah left the office, the locket heavy against her chest and the brass key burning in her pocket, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more complex than a simple inheritance. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings, but curiosity, the same relentless drive that had made her a good journalist, was already planning the drive north. Sarah's hands trembled as she set the phone down, the lawyer's words echoing in her mind. Margaret Chen, a grandmother she'd never known existed. The woman had died 3 weeks ago, and somehow impossibly had left Sarah a cabin in the mountains of Northern California. I don't understand, Sarah had stammered into the phone. My grandmother died when I was 5. My father never mentioned anyone named Margaret. According to our records, Margaret Chen was your father's mother, the lawyer had explained patiently. She specifically requested that if anything happened to her, the property should go to you. There's a key and some documents waiting for pickup. Now, staring at the business card the courier had delivered an hour later, Sarah felt the familiar weight of her father's secrets pressing down on her. David Chen had been a man of few words and even fewer explanations about their family history. Every time young Sarah had asked about grandparents, aunts, uncles, he'd simply said they were better off on their own. The law office sat in a narrow building wedged between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner in downtown Oakland. Sarah climbed the steep stairs to the 3rd floor, her sneakers squeaking against the worn linoleum. The receptionist, a woman with steel-grey hair and kind eyes, handed her a manila envelope without ceremony. Miss Chen, Mr. Hartwell is in court today, but he wanted me to give you this. Said to call if you have any questions. Inside the envelope, Sarah found a brass key attached to a wooden keychain carved in the shape of a pine tree, along with a deed that made her heart race. The property was described as 47 acres, including 1 single-family dwelling and associated outbuildings located in Mendocino County. At the bottom of the deed, in spidery handwriting, someone had written, "For Sarah, the truth is in the walls, trust no one else, MC." The drive north took 3 hours through winding mountain roads that seemed to lead away from civilization itself. Sarah's aging Honda struggled with the elevation, and she found herself checking the GPS obsessively as cell service flickered in and out. The address led her down a dirt road so narrow that branches scraped against her windows. When the cabin finally came into view, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the rustic shack she'd imagined. The structure was solid and well-maintained, with a wraparound porch and windows that gleamed despite the remote location. Someone had been taking care of this place. The brass key turned easily in the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a space that felt more like a home than a hideaway. The main room featured a stone fireplace with built-in bookshelves, comfortable furniture arranged around a coffee table made from a polished tree stump, and large windows that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. Everything was clean, dust-free, as if Margaret had just stepped out for a walk. Sarah moved through the rooms slowly, trying to absorb the reality of her inheritance. The kitchen was small but functional, stocked with non-perishable food and bottled water. The single bedroom contained a bed made up with crisp white sheets and a dresser that looked handmade, but it was the photographs scattered throughout the house that made her legs weak. There, on the mantel, stood a picture of her father as a young man, his arm around a petite Asian woman with Sarah's own dark eyes and stubborn chin. Other photos showed the same woman at different ages, working in a garden, standing beside a man in a military uniform, holding a baby that could only be Sarah's father. "Margaret," Sarah whispered, picking up a frame that showed the woman in her later years, silver-haired but still vibrant, standing in front of this very cabin. A sound outside made her freeze, footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. Sarah's pulse quickened as she moved to the window and peered through the curtain. A black SUV with tinted windows sat in her driveway, and two men in dark suits were walking toward the porch. They didn't look like neighbors coming to welcome her to the area. Sarah's mind raced. She grabbed the deed and Margaret's note, stuffing them into her jacket pocket, then looked around frantically for another exit. The back door led to a small porch overlooking the forest, and she could hear the men's voices now, low and urgent, though she couldn't make out the words. The front door handle rattled. They weren't bothering to knock. Sarah slipped out the back door and into the trees, her heart hammering as she heard the front door open behind her. Voices carried on the mountain air, male, authoritative, angry. "She's been here. Car's still warm. Find her and tear this place apart. It has to be here somewhere." Crouched behind a massive pine tree 50 yards from the cabin, Sarah watched through the windows as the men systematically searched her inheritance, overturning furniture and pulling books from shelves. Whatever they were looking for, they believed it was worth breaking and entering to find. And somehow, Sarah suspected that Margaret's cryptic note held the key to understanding exactly what she'd inherited and why people were willing to commit crimes to get it. The morning light filtering through the cabin's dusty windows revealed details Sarah had missed in yesterday's shadows. She sat at the rough-hewn table, nursing her second cup of coffee and studying the deed with fresh eyes. The legal language was dense, but one phrase kept drawing her attention, including all mineral rights and subsurface claims in perpetuity. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus asking if she'd made it safely. She started to type a response, then stopped. Something about yesterday's conversation with the lawyer nagged at her. Why had he seemed so eager to handle any sale? And that strange pause when she'd mentioned coming to see the property herself. A knock at the door made her jump, coffee sloshing onto the deed. She grabbed a dish towel and dabbed at the document while calling out, "Just a minute!" Through the window, she could see a woman about her mother's age standing on the porch, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. Sarah opened the door to find kind eyes set in a weathered face framed by silver hair. "You must be Sarah. I'm Dorothy Haskins, live about 2 miles down the valley. Thought you might appreciate a warm meal after traveling all this way." The woman's smile was genuine, but Sarah caught her glancing past her into the cabin's interior. "That's very kind of you. Please come in." Sarah stepped aside, grateful for human contact after the isolation of the night. Dorothy entered and set the dish on the counter, her eyes taking in every detail of the room. "Haven't been inside here for years. Your grandmother was a private woman, especially after—" She caught herself. "Well, after your grandfather passed. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know much about either of them. My mother never spoke of her family." Something flickered across Dorothy's expression. Families are complicated things. Sometimes silence seems kinder than truth. She turned toward the mantelpiece where Sarah had noticed several framed photographs the night before. "Your grandmother was proud of you, though. Kept newspaper clippings about your journalism work." Sarah's breath caught. "She knew about my career?" "Oh yes, she knew quite a bit." Dorothy's fingers traced the edge of one frame. She also knew there were people who'd rather keep the past buried. That's why she was so careful about everything. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. What kind of past? Dorothy moved to the window, looking out at the tree line. This valley's seen its share of secrets, mining operations, land disputes, money changing hands in ways that weren't always legal. She turned back to Sarah. "Your grandfather stumbled onto something he shouldn't have back in '78. 3 days after he went to the authorities, his truck went off Devil's Curve in an ice storm. Sarah felt her investigative instincts sharpening. You don't think it was an accident? Ice storms don't explain cut brake lines. Dorothy's voice was barely above a whisper. Your grandmother found the truck before the police did. She was smart enough to keep quiet about what she'd seen, but she never forgot. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The mineral rights are worth more than you can imagine, especially now, with new extraction technologies. Dorothy moved toward the door. There's a reason Robert Kellner called you so quickly after the will was read. He represents certain interests that would prefer this land change hands quietly. Sarah's mind raced. How do you know about Kellner? Small valley, Sarah. Word travels fast, and his car's been parked at the Mountain View Motel since Tuesday. Dorothy paused with her hand on the doorknob. Your grandmother left you more than just land. There's a safety deposit box at First Mountain Bank in Ridgefield, box 247. She made sure I had the spare key. She pressed a small brass key into Sarah's palm. Be careful who you trust. The same people who killed your grandfather are still around, and they have a lot more to lose now. After Dorothy left, Sarah stood in the suddenly oppressive silence of the cabin, turning the key over in her hands. Every instinct told her to pack up and leave, to sell the property and forget she'd ever heard of this place. But the journalist in her was already planning her next move. She grabbed her laptop and began researching mineral extraction in the region, mining permits, and land ownership records. 3 hours later, a picture began to emerge that made her blood run cold. The property wasn't just valuable, it was the key to a massive copper deposit that several major corporations had been circling for decades. Her phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed a local number. Miss Chen, this is Sheriff Tom Bradley. I understand you're staying up at the old Chen place. I wonder if you might have time to meet this afternoon. There are some things about your grandparents I think you should know. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. In her experience, when law enforcement wanted to share information, it usually meant they wanted to gather it instead. The morning light filtered through the cabin's dusty windows as Sarah spread the photographs across the wooden table, her coffee growing cold beside her. Each image told a piece of a story she was only beginning to understand. Her grandmother's face appeared in several shots, always standing beside a distinguished-looking man with steel-grey hair and calculating eyes. She picked up the clearest photograph, studying the background. Behind the couple stood what appeared to be an industrial complex, with smokestacks reaching toward an overcast sky. In the corner, barely visible, she could make out part of a sign, Field Mining Operations. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, any luck with those photos? His voice was tight with concern. Maybe. There's something about a mining operation. Listen, Marcus, I think I need to... The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, then noticed the signal bars had vanished completely. She walked to the window, holding the device up, searching for coverage. Nothing. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air crept down her spine. Outside, the forest seemed too quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind had stilled. Sarah moved carefully to the front window and peered through the gap in the curtains. A black SUV sat parked at the end of the dirt road, barely visible through the trees. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How long had it been there? She thought of the strange phone call yesterday, the way the caller had known her name, known about the cabin. Someone had been watching, waiting. Sarah grabbed the photographs and the manila envelope, stuffing them into her backpack along with the deed. If someone wanted whatever secrets this place held, they wouldn't find them easily. She remembered seeing an old root cellar behind the cabin during her initial exploration, a place where previous generations had stored preserves and supplies through harsh winters. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped out the back door. The root cellar was built into a small hillside, its wooden door weathered but sturdy. Sarah lifted the heavy latch and descended into the musty darkness, using her phone's flashlight to navigate the stone steps. The cellar was larger than she'd expected, with shelves lining the walls and several wooden crates stacked in the corners. She found a loose stone in the wall and hollowed out a space behind it, wrapping the documents in an old piece of canvas before hiding them inside. As she climbed back up the steps, she heard the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming. Sarah's pulse quickened. She closed the cellar door carefully and made her way back toward the cabin, staying low behind the woodpile. Through the trees, she could see two figures approaching the front door. Both wore dark clothing, moving with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to getting what they came for. The taller figure raised his hand to knock, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he tried the door handle. When it didn't yield, he stepped back and nodded to his companion, who produced something from his jacket. Lock picks. Sarah didn't wait to see more. She circled wide around the cabin, using the forest as cover, and made her way toward where they'd left their vehicle. If she could get to her car, maybe she could drive down to town, find help, figure out what was really happening. But as she approached the road, her heart sank. Her Honda sat 20 yards away from the black SUV, but there was a third man leaning against her driver's side door, arms crossed, clearly standing guard. She was trapped. Sarah retreated deeper into the woods, her mind racing. These weren't random thieves or vandals. They moved like professionals, like people who knew exactly what they were looking for. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Somehow her presence at the cabin had triggered this response. Behind her, she heard the sound of the cabin door opening, followed by muffled voices. They were inside now, searching. How long before they realized she wasn't there? How long before they expanded their search to the surrounding forest? She needed to think like her grandmother would have. This was Lily Chen's sanctuary, her hiding place. There had to be other secrets, other ways in and out. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember every detail of the cabin's construction, every story Marcus had told her about the area. Then she remembered the old mining tunnels. Marcus had mentioned them in passing, networks that honeycombed through the mountains from the early 1900s, some connected to natural cave systems that stretched for miles underground. If her grandmother had been involved with mining operations, if these photographs meant what she thought they meant, then maybe the cabin's location wasn't random at all. Maybe it was positioned exactly where it needed to be, above or near one of those forgotten passages. Sarah began moving uphill, away from the cabin but parallel to the ridgeline, searching for any sign of the old workings. Behind her, she could hear the men's voices growing more agitated as their search proved fruitless. She had bought herself time, but not much. Now she needed to find answers before they found her. The morning sun cast long shadows through the cabin windows as Sarah spread the documents across the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Her grandmother's journal lay open beside them, its yellowed pages filled with cryptic notes about mineral rights and survey coordinates that meant nothing to her. She traced her finger along a hand-drawn map that showed the cabin's location, marked with an X, surrounded by dozens of small circles, scattered across what appeared to be hundreds of acres. Each circle bore a number and a date, some going back 40 years. The sound of gravel crunching outside made her freeze. Through the window, she watched a black SUV pull up beside her car, its tinted windows reflecting the morning light like dead eyes. Two men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and practiced. Sarah's heart hammered as she quickly gathered the documents, shoving them into the journal before sliding it under a stack of old magazines. The knock on the door came seconds later, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through her bones. "Miss Chen? We'd like to have a word with you." She approached the door slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Who are you?" "Federal investigators. We're looking into some irregularities regarding this property." Through the peephole she could see the taller man holding up a badge, but something about their demeanor felt wrong. Real federal agents would have called ahead, would have come during business hours, would have brought local law enforcement. "I'm going to need to verify your credentials," she called out, backing away from the door. "You can wait while I make some calls." The silence that followed stretched too long. Sarah crept to the side window and peered around the curtain. The shorter man was circling toward the back of the cabin while his partner remained at the front door. Her phone showed no signal. Moving quickly but quietly, she grabbed her grandmother's journal and the deed from under the magazines. The back door was her only option, but she could hear footsteps on the rear porch. She was trapped. The front door handle rattled. Sarah climbed onto the kitchen counter and pushed open the small window above the sink. It was barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, but it was her only chance. She dropped the journal outside first, then forced herself through the opening, her ribs scraping against the frame. She hit the ground hard, pine needles and dirt grinding into her palms. The journal had fallen open, its pages scattered by the morning breeze. She scrambled to collect them, hearing the men's voices growing louder as they found ways into the cabin. The forest beckoned, dense and dark beyond the clearing. Sarah ran toward it, clutching the rescued pages to her chest. Behind her, she heard the front door splinter open. "She's not here. Check the back rooms. Look for any papers, anything that might be important." Sarah pressed herself against a massive pine tree, its bark rough against her back. Through the branches, she could see the men moving through her cabin, their search methodical and thorough. They weren't federal agents. Real investigators would have secured the scene, would have called for backup. One of them emerged holding her laptop. "Found this. Might have something useful. What about the documents?" The old man said she'd have inherited everything. Nothing obvious. Maybe she's got them with her. The old man. Sarah's mind raced. Who else knew about her inheritance? She'd barely understood it herself until yesterday. She waited until the SUV disappeared down the mountain road before venturing back to the cabin. The door hung askew on its hinges, and her belongings were scattered across every room. They'd been thorough. Drawers pulled out, cushions overturned, even the floorboards pried up in places. But they'd missed something. In her grandmother's bedroom, Sarah noticed a loose stone in the fireplace. Behind it, wrapped in oiled cloth, was another bundle of papers. These were different, official documents with corporate letterheads and legal seals. As she read, the scope of what she'd inherited became clear. The land beneath and around the cabin wasn't just property. It was a web of mineral rights stretching across 3 counties, rights that her grandmother had quietly accumulated over decades. The small circles on the map weren't random. They marked survey points for what appeared to be one of the largest undeveloped copper deposits in the region. Her phone buzzed. Somehow, she had signal again. The text was from an unknown number. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. Return it or join your grandmother." Sarah's blood turned cold. Her grandmother hadn't died of natural causes in some distant nursing home. She'd been murdered, and now they were coming for Sarah. She looked around the violated cabin, at her scattered belongings and broken door. This wasn't her sanctuary anymore. It was ground zero in a war she'd unknowingly inherited. The fortune her grandmother had left her was real, but so were the people willing to kill for it. Sarah's fingers trembled as she held the photograph up to the lamplight. The woman in the faded sepia image bore an unmistakable resemblance. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw that Sarah saw in her own mirror each morning. But it was the location that made her breath catch. The woman stood beside a massive oak tree, and in the background, partially obscured by shadows, was the very cabin Sarah now occupied. The photograph had been tucked inside a leather-bound journal she'd discovered behind a loose floorboard beneath the kitchen table. The board had creaked differently when she'd stepped on it that morning, and her curiosity had gotten the better of her now. 3 hours later, she sat surrounded by the journal's contents, dozens of loose papers, more photographs, and what appeared to be hand-drawn maps of the surrounding forest. Margaret Chen. Her grandmother's name was written in elegant script across the bottom of the photograph, dated 1963. Sarah's mother had never mentioned her. In fact, whenever Sarah had asked about grandparents, her mother had grown quiet and changed the subject. Now she understood why. The journal entries painted a picture of a woman living in fear. Margaret wrote about the consortium with barely concealed terror, describing midnight visitors and threatening phone calls. She'd hidden something, something valuable enough that she'd lived like a hermit for decades, trusting no one. "They think they can wait me out," one entry read, "but I've made sure the truth will survive, even if I don't. The real map is safe where only my blood can find it." Sarah's phone buzzed, making her jump. Marcus again. She'd been avoiding his calls since discovering that his employer, Blackstone Holdings, had been mentioned 3 times in Margaret's journal, never in a positive context. The same company that had called her yesterday, expressing interest in purchasing the cabin. She let the call go to voicemail and returned to the journal. Margaret's handwriting grew more erratic in the later entries, as if she'd been writing in haste or under stress. One passage, dated just 2 months ago, made Sarah's blood run cold. "They're getting closer. I can feel it. The Patterson boy has been asking questions in town about the old mine claims. They must suspect I have the original surveys. If something happens to me, I pray my granddaughter is stronger than her mother was. The truth about Copper Ridge cannot die with me." A soft thud from outside made Sarah freeze. She'd been so absorbed in reading that she'd lost track of time. Darkness had fallen while she sat at the kitchen table. The thud came again, followed by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on gravel. Sarah quickly stuffed the papers back into the journal and looked around frantically. The floorboard, she had to hide it, but the footsteps were getting closer, and she could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the windows. 3 soft knocks echoed through the cabin, patient, polite, somehow more terrifying than if someone had tried to break down the door. "Sarah Chen?" The voice was male, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "My name is Vincent Thorne. I represent certain interested parties regarding your recent inheritance. I'd very much like to speak with you." She remained silent, clutching the journal against her chest. The floorboard where she'd found it was still raised, evidence of her discovery clearly visible in the lamplight. "I know you're in there, Miss Chen. Your car is outside, and I can see the lights. I'm not here to harm you, quite the opposite. I'm here to help you understand the dangerous situation you've inherited along with this property." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself moving toward the door. There was something in his tone, not threatening but urgent, warning. "My grandmother," she started to say, then stopped. She shouldn't engage, shouldn't let him know she'd found anything. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," Thorne continued, "but she was also carrying a burden that cost her her peace of mind and, ultimately, her life. The same burden has now passed to you, whether you realize it or not." "What kind of burden?" The words escaped before Sarah could stop them. "The kind that gets people killed, Ms. Chen. May I come in? Standing out here in the open isn't safe for either of us." Sarah's mind raced. Every instinct screamed not to trust him. But Margaret's journal had made one thing clear. There were forces at work here that Sarah didn't understand, and ignorance wasn't going to protect her. "How do I know you're not one of them?" she called through the door. A pause. "Then, because if I were, you'd already be dead, and we'd be tearing this place apart looking for what your grandmother hid. Instead, I'm standing on your porch, asking politely for 5 minutes of your time." Sarah looked down at the journal in her hands, then at the raised floorboard. Whatever her grandmother had been protecting, she was now the guardian of that secret, and she was running out of time to figure out what it was worth and who was willing to kill for it. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the faces looking back at her. Her grandmother as a young woman, standing beside a man she didn't recognize, both of them holding mining equipment. Behind them loomed the entrance to what looked like the same cave system she discovered yesterday. Written on the back in faded ink, Lee Wei and Thomas Morrison, Blackstone Mine, 1952. Morrison. She'd heard that name somewhere recently. Marcus looked over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. "Your grandmother was involved in the original mining operation?" "Apparently." Sarah flipped through more photographs from the metal box they'd found hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Each image told a story of a thriving mining community that had seemingly vanished without a trace. But according to everything I've read about this area, there was never any significant mining here. Someone rewrote history then. Marcus picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping from the box. Listen to this. Blackstone Mining Consortium strikes major vein. Stock prices soar. It's dated June 15th, 1952. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Detective Rodriguez. She hesitated before answering, knowing the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. Miss Chen, we need to talk. Now. Rodriguez's voice was sharp with urgency. There's been another incident. What kind of incident? The kind where someone ends up dead. How quickly can you get to town? Sarah's blood ran cold. Who? Eleanor Blackwood. Shot 3 times in her study last night. Her housekeeper found her this morning. The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers. Marcus caught it before it hit the floor, quickly ending the call. We need to leave. Now! But Sarah couldn't move. Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who'd been so desperate to buy the cabin, who'd known more about Sarah's grandmother than she'd let on. Now she was dead, and Sarah felt the walls of some invisible trap closing around her. This is about the mine, she whispered. It has to be. Marcus was already shoving the photographs and documents back into the metal box. We'll figure it out later. Right now we need to get somewhere safe. Safe? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Someone killed Eleanor Blackwood in her own home. If they can get to her, they can get to anyone. They drove toward town in tense silence, the metal box hidden beneath blankets in the back seat. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Eleanor had been wealthy, connected, protected by security systems and staff. Yet someone had walked into her home and executed her. As they neared the police station, Sarah spotted a familiar figure waiting by the entrance. A tall man in an expensive suit, the same one she'd seen talking to Eleanor at the diner. He was scanning the street with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to watching and being watched. Don't stop, she told Marcus urgently. Keep driving. But Rodriguez is expecting that man by the entrance. He was with Eleanor yesterday. If she's dead and he's here... Sarah didn't need to finish the thought. Marcus drove past the station and pulled into an alley 3 blocks away. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed Rodriguez's number. Where are you? The detective demanded. I've got a witness who saw your rental car near the Blackwood estate last night. That's impossible. We were at the cabin all evening. Can anyone verify that? Sarah realized with growing dread that they couldn't. They'd been alone, isolated, with no witnesses to their whereabouts. Detective, there's a man in a grey suit waiting outside your station. He was seen with Eleanor yesterday. You need to... Miss Chen, I'm going to need you to come in voluntarily, or I'll have to issue a warrant. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, understanding with crystal clarity that she was being framed. Someone had killed Eleanor and was now positioning Sarah as the prime suspect. We can't go to the police, she told Marcus. Someone's playing a bigger game here, and we're being set up as the fall guys. Marcus started the engine again. Then where do we go? Sarah thought about the photographs, about the mining operation that had been erased from history, about the fortune that Eleanor had mentioned. Someone had killed to protect these secrets before, and they were killing again. Back to the mine, she said finally. Whatever answers we need, they're down there. And if we're going to be fugitives anyway, we might as well find out what we're running from. As they drove back toward the mountains, Sarah caught glimpses of police cars in her side mirror, still distant but growing closer. The hunt had begun, and she was the prey, but she was also Li Wei's granddaughter, and perhaps it was time to discover what that truly meant. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Sarah spread its contents across the cabin's rough-hewn table. Moonlight slanted through the windows, casting long shadows over documents that seemed to pulse with significance in the dim light. Marcus stood guard by the window, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. These aren't just property records, Sarah whispered, her fingers trembling as she lifted a yellowed deed. Look at the dates. This goes back to 1923. The papers told a story that made her grandmother's secrecy suddenly make terrible sense. Chen Wei-ming hadn't just owned this cabin, She'd owned mineral rights to thousands of acres throughout the mountains, rights that had been systematically stolen through a web of forged documents, bribed officials, and legal manipulations that spanned decades. Lithium deposits, Marcus read over her shoulder, his voice tight with understanding. Sarah, do you realize what this means? With the electric vehicle boom, these rights are worth hundreds of millions, she finished, her mouth dry. A photograph slipped from between the pages, a young Chinese woman standing beside a tall man in an expensive suit. On the back, in careful handwriting, Wei Ming and Harrison Blackwood, 1952. Sarah's blood chilled. She'd heard that name before, whispered in her father's bitter ramblings about powerful families who crushed anyone in their path. The Blackwoods owned half the mining operations in 3 states, their political influence stretching from local courthouses to Senate chambers. My grandmother trusted him, Sarah said, studying the photograph. The woman's smile was radiant, unaware that the man beside her would eventually orchestrate the theft of her legacy. She had no idea he was setting her up. Marcus moved closer, his presence steadying her as she continued reading. The documents revealed a systematic campaign of theft that began shortly after Wei Ming's husband died in a mining accident, an accident that these papers suggested might not have been accidental at all. A twig snapped outside, and both of them froze. Marcus drew his weapon, motioning for Sarah to gather the documents. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness, multiple figures positioning themselves around the cabin. Back door, Marcus whispered, but even as he spoke, they heard the soft click of boots on the rear porch. Sarah stuffed the most crucial documents into her jacket, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were trapped, surrounded by people who would kill to keep these secrets buried. The weight of her grandmother's courage pressed down on her. Wei Ming had risked everything to preserve this evidence, hiding it away until the right moment. The cellar, Sarah breathed, remembering the old root cellar she'd discovered during her first exploration of the property. There's a tunnel. It leads to the old mine shaft. They moved like ghosts through the cabin, every creak of the floorboards sounding like thunder in the silence. Behind them, Sarah heard the subtle sounds of professionals preparing to breach the building. These weren't the same amateurs who had ransacked her apartment. This was a coordinated operation. The cellar door opened with a rusty groan that made them both wince. Sarah led the way down the narrow stairs, her phone's flashlight revealing stone walls slick with moisture. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall that her grandmother had constructed with meticulous care. As they crawled through the cramped passage, Sarah heard the cabin door splinter above them. Voices echoed through the floorboards, calm, professional, deadly. They were searching systematically, tearing apart everything in their path. "She's not here," someone called out, and Sarah recognized the voice from the parking garage. Detective Morrison had found them, and he hadn't come alone. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, carved by desperate hands decades ago. Sarah's grandmother had planned for this moment, creating an escape route that spoke to her deep understanding of how dangerous these secrets were. Every inch of the passage represented hours of back-breaking labor, all to ensure that justice might someday be possible. They emerged into the abandoned mine shaft, gasping in the cold mountain air. Sarah's car was a quarter-mile away, parked where she'd left it hours ago. As they ran through the forest, branches tearing at their clothes, she heard the distant sound of the cabin being torn apart. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her down behind a fallen log as flashlight beams swept through the trees. "They've got dogs," he whispered, and sure enough, Sarah heard the baying of tracking hounds in the distance. The documents in her jacket felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of business and government, proof that her grandmother's death hadn't been the end of the story but the beginning. Wei Ming Chen had spent 40 years gathering this evidence, waiting for someone who could use it effectively. As they crept toward the car, Sarah made a silent promise to the grandmother she'd never met. The Blackwoods had stolen everything from her family, but they hadn't counted on one thing: Wei Ming's granddaughter inherited more than just property rights. She'd inherited the will to fight back. The storm that had been brewing all evening finally broke as Sarah and Marcus made their way back to the cabin, rain lashing against the windshield of his truck. The headlights carved weak paths through the darkness, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from the tree line. "We need to get those documents somewhere safe," Marcus said, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "If Blackwood Industries is willing to kill for them, keeping them at the cabin is suicide." Sarah clutched the leather portfolio against her chest, feeling the weight of generations of secrets within its worn pages. The meeting with Eleanor Hartwell had revealed more than she'd bargained for. Her grandmother hadn't just been a victim of corporate greed, she'd been a key player in exposing it. The documents proved that Blackwood had been illegally dumping toxic waste on the land for decades, contaminating the groundwater and causing the cluster of cancers that had devastated the local community. "There's a safety deposit box in town," Sarah said. "I opened it when I first inherited the cabin, but I never used it." "Good. We'll go first thing in the morning." Marcus pulled into the cabin's driveway, the truck's engine cutting through the sound of rain. "But tonight we need to He stopped mid-sentence, his hand shooting out to grab Sarah's arm. Through the rain-streaked windshield, they could see a faint glow emanating from the cabin's windows. "I know I turned off all the lights," Sarah whispered. Marcus reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a flashlight, then quietly opened his door. "Stay here." "Like hell." Sarah was already climbing out of the passenger side, the portfolio tucked inside her jacket. "This is my property, and I'm tired of running." They approached the cabin cautiously, staying low and using the parked cars as cover. The front door stood slightly ajar, and Sarah's heart sank as she realized someone had picked the new lock she'd installed just days before. Marcus held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They rushed the door together. The living room had been ransacked. Books lay scattered across the floor, cushions slashed open, and every drawer had been pulled out and emptied. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was the figure standing in the kitchen doorway, a tall man in an expensive suit pointing a gun directly at them. "Miss Chen, so good of you to return." His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost in the storm." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, though she suspected she already knew. "Vincent Reeves, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions for Blackwood Industries. I believe you have something that belongs to my company." Marcus stepped slightly in front of Sarah. "Those documents belong to her grandmother's estate. Blackwood has no legal claim." Reeves smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Legal claim is such a limiting concept, don't you think? Sometimes the right thing to do transcends mere legality." He gestured with the gun toward the portfolio. "Those documents contain proprietary information that could seriously damage my company's reputation. I'm prepared to offer a very generous sum for their return." "How generous?" Sarah asked, surprising both men. Marcus shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. $2 million, cash, enough to buy yourself a very nice life somewhere far from here." For a moment, the only sound was rain drumming against the cabin's roof. Sarah could feel the weight of the portfolio against her ribs, could almost hear her grandmother's voice urging her to fight. But she could also see the determination in Reeves' eyes, the casual way he held the weapon as if threatening people was just another business meeting. "What guarantee do I have that you won't kill us anyway?" she asked. "You don't," Reeves admitted. "But you have my word that if you cooperate, you'll both walk away from this. If you don't," he shrugged, "well, accidents happen in these remote areas. People get lost in storms, fall into ravines, very tragic." Sarah's mind raced. The portfolio contained copies. Eleanor had made sure of that, but Reeves didn't know that. She could give him what he wanted, take the money, and still expose Blackwood later. But something in his manner told her that he had no intention of letting them live, regardless of what she decided. "I need to think about it," she said. "I'm afraid time is rather short." Reeves replied, checking his expensive watch. "My associates will be arriving soon to clean up any loose ends. This is very much a limited-time offer." As if summoned by his words, headlights suddenly swept across the cabin's windows. A car was coming up the driveway, moving fast despite the weather. Reeves smiled again, and this time Sarah saw nothing but cold calculation in his expression. "Ah," he said, raising his weapon. "It appears your time is up." The abandoned mining office sat like a forgotten tomb against the mountainside, its weathered boards grey with decades of neglect. Sarah's heart hammered as she followed Marcus through the overgrown path, dead branches catching at her jacket. Behind them, Elena moved with surprising grace for someone her age, her eyes sharp and alert. "Your grandmother and I used to meet here," Elena whispered, producing an old brass key from her coat pocket. After the lawyers started sniffing around, after people began asking questions about the Chen family's sudden departure, the door creaked open, releasing the musty smell of old paper and dust. Inside, shafts of late-afternoon sunlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating a scene frozen in time. Desks sat exactly where they'd been left 40 years ago, papers still scattered across their surfaces. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their metal drawers slightly ajar, as if someone had been searching through them in haste. "What exactly are we looking for?" Marcus asked, running his finger along a dust-covered ledger. Elena moved toward the back of the office, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "Proof. Your grandmother suspected the mine produced far more than anyone reported. The official records show modest silver deposits, enough to keep a small operation running for a few years. But Li Chen believed there was something else." Sarah felt drawn to a large map mounted on the far wall, its corners curled with age. Red pins marked various points throughout the mountain range, with handwritten notes in faded ink. Most were in English, but some appeared to be in Chinese characters. She was documenting everything, Sarah breathed, recognizing something in the careful notation that reminded her of her own research methods. "Look at these dates. Some of these surveys continued right up until she disappeared." Elena nodded grimly. Lee discovered that the official mining reports were falsified. The real deposits— She paused, glancing toward the windows as if expecting to see watchers in the growing shadows. "Let's just say they were significant enough to change the balance of power in this entire region." Marcus had found a filing cabinet that wasn't locked, its drawers sliding open with metallic groans. "There are geological surveys here, but they're not matching what we saw in Thomas Hartwell's office. These show mineral compositions that are—" He pulled out a folder, his engineering background evident in how quickly he processed the technical data. "Sarah, these numbers don't make sense. If even half of this is accurate, we're not talking about a small family fortune. We're talking about millions," Elena confirmed. "Possibly tens of millions, even by 1980s standards. Your grandmother stumbled onto something that powerful people had worked very hard to keep quiet." Sarah's mind raced as pieces began falling into place. That's why they needed her gone, not just to steal what she'd already found, but to stop her from exposing the larger conspiracy. A sound outside made all three of them freeze. Footsteps, careful but deliberate, circling the building. Elena's face went pale. "We need to leave, now." But Marcus was still pulling files from the cabinet, stuffing them into his jacket. "Just give me 30 more seconds. There's something here about a partnership agreement, something involving—" The front door exploded inward with a crash that sent splinters flying across the room. Two men in dark clothing entered, moving with military precision. Sarah recognized the taller one immediately. He'd been watching her at the diner, probably following them since they left town. "Step away from the files," the man commanded, his hand resting on something beneath his jacket. "All of you, hands where we can see them." Elena surprised Sarah by laughing, a sound sharp with decades of suppressed anger. "Still protecting your employer's secrets, I see. Tell me, how much are they paying you to clean up their messes these days?" "Enough," the man replied coldly. "Mrs. Morrison, you should have stayed retired. And Miss Chen—" his eyes fixed on Sarah with unmistakable menace. "You should have been satisfied with inheriting a simple cabin." Sarah felt terror and fury warring in her chest. These men represented everything that had destroyed her family, stolen her heritage, murdered her grandmother. But they also stood between her and the truth. "What's in those files that scares you so much?" she demanded, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. The shorter man moved toward Marcus, clearly intending to retrieve the documents he'd gathered. That's when Elena acted. Despite her age, she moved like someone who'd been preparing for this moment for decades. Her hand swept across the nearest desk, sending a heavy glass ashtray flying toward the overhead light. The room plunged into chaos as shadows danced wildly across the walls. "Run!" Elena shouted. "Back exit, through the mine entrance!" Sarah grabbed Marcus's hand as gunshots echoed behind them, Elena's voice rising above the noise with directions to an escape route Sarah prayed still existed. The files clutched against Marcus's chest might hold the answers she'd been seeking, but first they had to survive long enough to read them. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to press against the cabin walls. Sarah sat at her grandmother's desk, the decoded journal pages spread before her like a roadmap to hell. Every entry painted a clearer picture of the Blackwood Mining Company's crimes: illegal dumping, bribery, the systematic poisoning of 3 counties' water supply, and at the center of it all, her grandmother's careful documentation of evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful families in the state. Marcus paced by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand the risks," he said quietly, "but we need federal protection now. Local law enforcement is compromised." He ended the call and turned to Sarah. "FBI is sending a team, but they won't be here until morning. We're on our own tonight." Sarah's hands trembled as she photographed each page with her phone. "There's more here than just environmental crimes. Look at this." She pointed to an entry dated 3 months before her grandmother's supposed accident. She discovered they were using shell companies to launder money through indigenous land purchases. They weren't just poisoning people, they were stealing their ancestral territories. The weight of her grandmother's secret life settled over her like a shroud. Helen Chen hadn't been a recluse hiding from family shame. She'd been a guardian, protecting evidence that could bring justice to thousands of victims while knowing it painted a target on her back. A sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps crunched on gravel, deliberate and approaching fast. Marcus moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. 3 vehicles, maybe 8 people. His voice was steady, but Sarah caught the tension underneath. "They're not trying to hide anymore." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the most crucial journal pages and stuffed them into a waterproof bag, along with her phone and the original deed. "Is there another way out?" Before Marcus could answer, James Blackwood's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Sarah Chen, you're trespassing on private property. Come out with your hands visible and we can resolve this civilly." "Like hell," Sarah muttered. She knew now that James had killed her grandmother. The journal's final entries made it clear Helen had been preparing to turn over the evidence when she died. The timing wasn't coincidental. Marcus led her toward the back of the cabin. "There's a root cellar with a tunnel. Your grandmother showed it to me last year. Said it connected to the old mine shaft half a mile into the woods." They descended through a hidden trap door in the kitchen floor. The cellar was cramped and musty, filled with preserved foods and emergency supplies. At the far end, behind shelves of canned goods, Marcus revealed a narrow opening barely wide enough for one person. Above them, heavy boots thundered across the cabin floor. Sarah heard furniture crashing, voices shouting orders. James was done with subtle threats. "Go," Marcus whispered, pushing the waterproof bag into her hands. "Follow the tunnel straight. Don't deviate. I'll hold them off and follow when I can. I'm not leaving you." "Sarah." His hands gripped her shoulders. "This evidence is bigger than both of us. Your grandmother died protecting it. Don't let that be for nothing." The sound of splintering wood echoed from above. They were breaking down doors, searching room by room. Sarah squeezed through the opening into absolute darkness. The tunnel was roughly carved, with wooden supports that felt ancient under her fingers. She used her phone's flashlight sparingly, afraid the battery wouldn't last. The air was stale and cold, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Behind her, she heard Marcus replacing the shells, covering her escape route, then shouting voices, closer now. Her heart clenched, but she forced herself forward. Every step took her deeper into the mountain's belly, following a path her grandmother had probably used to gather evidence in secret. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead. Sarah's shoulders scraped against the narrow walls, and more than once she had to squeeze through spaces that seemed impossible to navigate. But her grandmother had been smaller, frailer. If Helen could make this journey, so could she. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, Sarah saw a faint grey light ahead. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, the abandoned mine shaft Marcus had mentioned. Rusty equipment littered the floor, and the air carried a metallic taste that made her stomach turn. She climbed toward the entrance, emerging into the pre-dawn forest. The cabin was invisible from here, but she could see the glow of flashlights through distant trees. James's men were still searching. Sarah pulled out her phone and checked the photos of the journal pages, all intact. The evidence that had cost her grandmother's life was safe for now. But she wasn't. James Blackwood had killed to protect his family's secrets once. He wouldn't hesitate to do it again. And somewhere behind her in that dark tunnel, Marcus was facing 8 armed men alone. Sarah started running through the forest, carrying the weight of 3 generations of secrets toward an uncertain dawn. The warehouse smelled of rust and old motor oil, its cavernous interior broken only by shafts of moonlight streaming through broken skylights. Sarah pressed herself against a concrete pillar, Marcus beside her, both breathing hard from their sprint across the industrial district. Detective Morrison had insisted they meet here after his cryptic phone call about having the missing piece. "Where is he?" Marcus whispered, checking his watch. They'd been waiting 15 minutes past the agreed time. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Morrison, 2nd floor, office overlooking the main floor. "Come alone." She showed Marcus the message. He shook his head immediately. "Not happening." "We stick together." He said alone, "Marcus." And I said not happening. His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "After everything we've been through, you're not going anywhere without me." They found the metal staircase leading to the 2nd floor offices. Each step echoed in the vast space below. The office door stood slightly ajar, yellow light spilling into the corridor. Sarah pushed it open. Morrison sat behind a battered desk, but something was wrong. His face was pale, a thin line of sweat beading his forehead despite the warehouse's chill. His service weapon lay on the desk in front of him, but his hands weren't near it. "Detective Morrison?" Sarah stepped forward, Marcus close behind. "Stop right there." The voice came from the shadows behind Morrison. A figure emerged, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in the decrepit warehouse. Sarah recognized him immediately from the photos they'd found. Charles Blackwood, her grandmother's former business partner. "Miss Chen, you've been quite difficult to locate." Morrison's eyes darted to Sarah, then to something behind her. Too late, she heard the footsteps. Strong hands grabbed both her and Marcus from behind, forcing them into chairs facing the desk. "The infamous Sarah Chen," Blackwood continued, moving to stand beside Morrison. "You have your grandmother's stubborn streak." Eleanor was equally persistent. "You killed her," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I defended my interests, as I'm prepared to do now." Blackwood picked up Morrison's weapon, checking the chamber with practiced ease. "Detective Morrison has been very helpful in tracking your movements. Apparently, his daughter's medical bills have made him quite amenable to additional income sources." Morrison's face crumpled. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I tried to warn you, to keep you away, but they—" "Shut up," Blackwood snapped. "Miss Chen, you have something that belongs to me. The deed your grandmother left you is just the beginning. There are documents, account numbers, records of transactions that could prove inconvenient for my current business ventures. I don't know what you're talking about. The safety deposit box key, Ms. Chen. We know Eleanor left you more than just the cabin. Sarah's blood went cold. She hadn't told anyone about the small brass key she'd found sewn into the cabin's mattress. Not even Marcus. I don't have any key. Blackwood's smile was reptilian. Your friend Marcus here told us all about your late-night searches of the cabin. Very thorough work. Surely you found Eleanor's final gift by now. Marcus jerked in his chair. I never... He stopped, his face going pale with realization. The phone calls. When you went for coffee, someone could have been listening. Very good, Blackwood said. We've been monitoring your communications for weeks. Every move, every discovery, every plan. Did you really think two amateurs could outsmart an organization that's operated successfully for 30 years? Sarah's mind raced. The key was in her jacket pocket. She'd carried it everywhere since finding it, afraid to leave it at the cabin. But there had to be a way out of this. Even if I give you the key, she said, you can't let us go. We know too much. Finally, some realism. Yes, this situation has progressed beyond the point of simple warnings. Blackwood raised the gun. But I'm not unreasonable. The key, and I'll make it quick. Morrison suddenly lunged forward, grabbing for the weapon. Run! He shouted. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Morrison staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, but his distraction gave Sarah the split second she needed. She kicked her chair backward, catching one of their captors in the knees, while Marcus dove for the light switch. Darkness plunged the office into chaos. Shouts, more gunshots, the sound of glass breaking. Sarah felt Marcus grab her hand, pulling her toward where she hoped the door was. Behind them, Blackwood's voice rose above the confusion. Find them! They can't leave this building! They crashed through the door and into the corridor, emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Behind them, footsteps pounded on metal flooring. Sarah clutched the key in her pocket, her grandmother's final secret, and ran for their lives through the maze of the warehouse's second floor. The exit had to be here somewhere. It had to be. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph Marcus had handed her. The black and white image showed a younger version of her grandmother standing beside a man in a military uniform, both of them smiling at the camera. Behind them loomed the familiar outline of the cabin, but it looked different somehow, newer, less weathered by time. This was taken in 1953, Marcus said quietly. Your grandmother, Maylene, and Captain James Morrison. They were lovers, but more than that, they were partners in something much bigger than either of them anticipated. Sarah looked up from the photograph, her mind racing. Partners in what? Marcus walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the darkening forest beyond. The Morrison Mining Company wasn't just extracting copper from these mountains. They discovered something else, rare earth elements that wouldn't become valuable for decades. Your grandmother helped Captain Morrison hide the true extent of their findings from his own company. Why would she do that? Because she understood what those elements would eventually be worth, and because she loved him. Marcus turned back to face her. They created a secret trust, hidden in plain sight. The cabin, the land, even some of the original mining equipment. It was all transferred into her name through a series of carefully orchestrated transactions. Sarah felt the weight of the deed in her jacket pocket. The papers I found are just the beginning. Your grandmother was meticulous. She documented everything, created a paper trail that would hold up in any court, but only if someone knew where to look. Marcus moved to an old filing cabinet and withdrew a thick folder. She left instructions, specific instructions for her heir. The folder contained dozens of documents, geological surveys, mineral rights agreements, correspondence between Maylin and various lawyers and government officials. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the papers, the signatures, the dates, the carefully worded contracts. It was all there. The Blackwood Corporation has been searching for these documents for 70 years, Marcus continued. They knew Morrison had hidden something, but they could never prove what or where. When your grandmother died, they thought the secret had died with her. Until I showed up. Until you showed up. Marcus nodded grimly. They've been monitoring the cabin, waiting for someone to claim it. When you arrived, they knew the game had changed. Sarah thought about Detective Harrison, about the way he'd appeared so conveniently after each incident. Detective Harrison works for them, doesn't he? Harrison's been on their payroll for years. Not officially, of course. He feeds them information, helps cover up their more questionable activities. Marcus sat down across from her. But he's not the only one. Blackwood has people everywhere. Local government, state agencies, even federal offices. They've built an empire on stolen land and hidden assets. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. So everything that's happened, the break-ins, the attacks, Tom's accident, all orchestrated to either scare you away or eliminate you entirely. Marcus leaned forward intently. But here's what they don't know. Your grandmother anticipated this. She knew they would eventually come for her family, so she built in protections. He pulled out another document, this one sealed in plastic. This is a full confession, written by Captain Morrison before his death in 1961. He details how Blackwood Corporation defrauded the government, how they covered up the true value of the mineral deposits, how they murdered him when he threatened to expose them. Sarah stared at the document. They killed him? Made it look like a hunting accident. But Morrison saw it coming. He gave this confession to your grandmother for safekeeping. Marcus's voice grew urgent. Sarah, with the documents you've found and this confession, you have enough evidence to not only reclaim your family's rightful inheritance, but to bring down one of the most corrupt corporate empires in the region. A sound outside made them both freeze. Car engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Marcus quickly gathered the documents, shoving them into a leather satchel. They found us, he whispered. There's a back way out through the basement. Take this. He pressed the satchel into her hands. Guard it with your life. What about you? I'll buy you time. Get to the county courthouse. Ask for Judge Patricia Vance. Tell her Marcus sent you. She's been waiting for this evidence for 20 years. He was already moving toward the front of the house. Whatever happens, don't let them get those documents. Sarah clutched the satchel to her chest as Marcus pointed toward a narrow staircase. Car doors slammed outside, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps on the porch. She had seconds to disappear before they broke down the door. As she descended into the darkness of the basement, she heard Marcus call out to the intruders, his voice calm and defiant. Gentlemen, you're trespassing on private property. The response was immediate, shouting voices, the splintering of wood. Sarah found the basement exit and slipped into the night, her grandmother's legacy burning like a torch in her hands. The warehouse smelled of rust and abandonment, moonlight filtering through broken skylights to cast skeletal shadows across the concrete floor. Sarah pressed herself against a support beam, the metal box containing her grandmother's documents, clutched tight against her chest. Marcus had gone silent 10 minutes ago after leading her through a maze of shipping containers, and the quiet felt more ominous than any threat. I know you're confused, Marcus's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead. But this is bigger than just your family's money, Sarah. The Blackwood Trust has been moving pieces for generations. She edged forward, bare feet silent on the cold concrete. The USB drive Elena had died protecting felt heavy in her pocket, proof of decades of murders, cover-ups, and stolen fortunes. But Marcus had been helping her, hadn't he? My grandmother trusted you, she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. A bitter laugh bounced off the warehouse walls. Lily Chen was brilliant, but she was naive. She thought she could expose everything and walk away clean. Some secrets are too valuable to surface. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. How Marcus always seemed one step ahead of their pursuers. How he knew exactly where to find the documents. How easily he'd gained access to Elena's research. You killed Elena. Elena killed herself the moment she decided to help you. I gave her every chance to walk away. Movement caught her peripheral vision. Sarah spun, but Marcus emerged from a different direction entirely, blocking her path to the exit. In the pale light, his familiar features looked alien, calculating. The trust offered Lily a fortune to disappear quietly, he continued, approaching with careful steps. More money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. But she had to play the martyr, leave breadcrumbs for her precious granddaughter to follow. So you've been working for them all along? Sarah backed toward what she hoped was another exit, but her shoulder hit cold metal. Dead end. I've been cleaning up their messes for 15 years. Your grandmother was just another mess. Marcus pulled something from his jacket, not a gun but a syringe filled with clear liquid. This will be quick, an overdose, tragic but believable for someone under so much stress. Sarah's mind raced. The shipping container behind her had a partially open door. If she could reach it, maybe find something to defend herself with, or another way out. The documents I found, she said, playing for time. Elena said there were more families like mine, more stolen fortunes. Dozens. The Blackwood Trust has been redistributing wealth for over a century, taking from those too weak to hold it and giving it to those with vision. Your great-grandfather's railroad money is funding medical research that will save thousands of lives. By murdering the rightful heirs? Marcus shrugged. Evolution isn't pretty, Sarah. The strong survive. She felt the container door against her back and shifted slightly, testing how far it would open. The hinges creaked softly. My grandmother figured it out, didn't she? That's why she hid everything. Lily got suspicious when her brother died. Started asking questions, hiring investigators. She was smart enough to realize she was next. Marcus raised the syringe, testing the plunger. She managed to fake her death and disappear for a while, but we found her eventually. Everyone surfaces sometime, except she had already hidden the proof. Which you led me right to. I have to admit, using you to find everything was elegant. Much easier than tearing apart that cabin board by board. Sarah's fingers found the container handle. There's one thing you didn't count on. What's that? She yanked the door open and dove inside, slamming it shut behind her. The container plunged into absolute darkness, but she could hear Marcus cursing outside, trying to force the door. Her hands swept the floor frantically until they found what she was hoping for, a crowbar left behind by whoever had used this space last. The door screeched open, and Marcus's silhouette appeared against the moonlit warehouse. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah gripped the crowbar and swung with everything she had. The impact sent Marcus stumbling backward, the syringe flying from his hand to shatter against concrete. She didn't wait to see if he'd get up, just ran for the warehouse exit with the metal box bouncing against her ribs. Behind her, Marcus shouted something about not being able to run forever, about the trust having resources she couldn't imagine. But Sarah was already pushing through the exit door into the cool night air, her grandmother's car keys heavy in her palm. She had the documents, the USB drive, and now she knew exactly who she was running from. Most importantly, she knew her grandmother had made it further than anyone realized before they caught her. If Lily Chen could stay hidden for months, her granddaughter could find a way to finish what she'd started. The engine turned over on the second try, and Sarah drove into the night with 15 years of buried secrets riding shotgun. The foundation stones were slick with decades of accumulated moisture, and Sarah's fingers found purchase between them with practiced ease. The metal box came free with a grinding scrape that seemed to echo through the entire structure above them. Marcus held the flashlight steady while she pried open the corroded clasp. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, lay documents that would change everything. Birth certificates, property deeds, and a leather-bound journal filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting. But it was the map that made Sarah's breath catch. A detailed survey of the land beneath the lake, marked with depths, currents, and most importantly, the precise location of the Chen family's original mining claims. Gold, Marcus whispered, reading over her shoulder. Your great-grandfather didn't just stumble onto a vein. He discovered an entire underground network. Sarah traced the lines with her fingertip, The claims extended far beyond what anyone suspected, reaching beneath properties now owned by Blackwood Industries, the local utility company, and half the town's commercial district. No wonder someone was willing to kill for this secret. A sound from above froze them both, footsteps crossing the cabin floor, heavy, deliberate, multiple sets. Sarah quickly rewrapped the documents and tucked them inside her jacket as Marcus switched off the flashlight. They crouched in absolute darkness, listening to muffled voices through the floorboards. Should have burned this place down years ago. The voice was unfamiliar, gruff, too conspicuous. The old woman was clever, hiding everything in plain sight. This second voice sent ice through Sarah's veins. Detective Morrison. Well, she's dead now, and soon the granddaughter will be too. Then we can tear this place apart properly. Sarah's hand found Marcus's in the darkness. His grip was steady, reassuring, but she could feel the tension in his muscles. They needed to get out, but the only exit was the narrow opening they'd crawled through, directly beneath where the men were standing. "Check the perimeter again," Morrison ordered. "Chen's car is still at the ranger station. She's here somewhere." Footsteps moved toward the door, but Morrison remained. Sarah could hear him walking slowly around the cabin, his steps creaking on the old boards. Then silence. She waited, counting her heartbeats before risking a whisper so quiet it was barely breath. "We have to move." Marcus nodded in the darkness. They crawled toward the opening, moving with agonizing care to avoid any sound. Sarah emerged first, pulling herself up through the gap behind the woodpile. The night air felt sharp after the musty closeness below. The forest around the cabin seemed empty, but Sarah knew better than to trust appearances. Morrison's people could be anywhere in the darkness. She motioned for Marcus to follow, and they began working their way through the trees, moving parallel to the path rather than on it. They'd covered maybe 50 yards when the shooting started. Muzzle flashes lit up the cabin like deadly fireworks, the sound of splintering wood mixing with shouted commands. Sarah and Marcus hit the ground, pressing themselves against a fallen log as bullets whined through the branches overhead. "There!" someone yelled. "By the tree line!" More gunfire erupted, closer now. Sarah realized with growing horror that there were multiple teams surrounding the area. They'd walked into a carefully planned trap, and the fact that the shooting had started meant Morrison's people thought they'd been spotted. Marcus grabbed her arm and pointed deeper into the forest away from the lake. It would mean abandoning their planned route to the ranger station, but staying here meant certain death. They scrambled to their feet and ran, branches tearing at their clothes as they crashed through the undergrowth. Behind them, she could hear pursuit, flashlight beams sweeping through the trees, voices coordinating the search. These weren't just hired thugs, this was a professional operation. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many people were willing to commit murder to keep the Chen family's secret buried? A bullet splintered bark inches from Sarah's head, and she veered left, pulling Marcus with her. They were moving blind now, guided only by starlight filtering through the canopy and the desperate need to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. The ground began to slope upward, and Sarah realized they were climbing toward the ridge that separated this valley from the next. If they could reach the other side, they might have a chance, but the climb would leave them exposed, and she could hear their hunters getting closer. Marcus stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, was a structure she didn't recognize, a small building that definitely hadn't been on any of the maps she'd studied. It looked old, possibly abandoned, but it was shelter. They approached carefully, but desperation overrode caution. As they drew closer, Sarah could see it was some kind of mining office, probably dating back to her great-grandfather's time. The door hung open on rusted hinges. Inside, Marcus's flashlight revealed equipment that looked decades old but well-preserved, and on the wall, a map that made Sarah's heart race with possibility and terror in equal measure. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus's men scattered, seeking cover behind rusted machinery and shipping containers. Sarah pressed herself against a concrete pillar, her heart hammering as bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces around her. The FBI team moved with practiced precision, their coordinated assault overwhelming Marcus's hastily assembled security force. "Sarah," Detective Morrison's voice cut through the gunfire. "Stay down!" She spotted Marcus retreating toward a side exit, clutching a metal briefcase. Without thinking, Sarah broke from cover and pursued him, ignoring Morrison's shouts behind her. This man had orchestrated her grandmother's murder, had killed innocent people to protect his empire. She wouldn't let him escape. The side door led to a narrow alley between warehouses. Marcus was already at his black sedan when Sarah emerged, her grandfather's revolver in her trembling hands. "Stop!" she called out. Marcus turned, his face a mask of cold fury. "You stupid girl. You have no idea what you've unleashed." "I know enough," Sarah said, stepping closer. "I know you killed my grandmother. I know about the stolen artifacts, the money laundering, all of it." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Your grandmother was a romantic fool, just like you. She thought she could expose us, bring justice to crimes committed decades ago. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." "Not anymore." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Agent Reynolds has everything, the documents, the evidence, testimony from your own people. It's over." "Is it?" Marcus's hand moved slowly toward his jacket. "Even if I fall, there are others. This network spans continents, Sarah. You think one raid will end it?" Before Sarah could react, Marcus drew his weapon. The alley exploded with sound as both guns fired simultaneously. Sarah felt a burning sensation across her shoulder as she dove behind a dumpster. Marcus wasn't so lucky. He staggered backward, crimson spreading across his white shirt. Morrison appeared at the mouth of the alley, his weapon drawn. "Suspect down! I need paramedics!" Sarah emerged from cover, pressing her hand to her bleeding shoulder. Marcus lay crumpled against his car. The briefcase spilled open beside him, revealing stacks of documents and what looked like bearer bonds. "The cabin," Marcus wheezed as Sarah approached. Blood flecked his lips. "You think you've won? The cabin was never the real prize." "What do you mean?" Sarah knelt beside him, ignoring Morrison's protests. Marcus's eyes were growing glassy. "Your grandmother hid something else, something we never found. The cabin was just the beginning." His head lolled to the side, and Sarah realized he was gone. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic bandaged her shoulder. The warehouse district swarmed with federal agents, local police, and crime scene technicians. Agent Reynolds approached, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Preliminary count shows we arrested 15 people, seized millions in cash and stolen artifacts," Reynolds said. "This is the biggest art theft ring bust in FBI history." "What about the others Marcus mentioned?" Sarah asked. "He said the network was bigger than just his operation. We'll follow every lead, track down every connection. Thanks to your grandmother's records and the evidence you provided, we have names, locations, financial records going back decades." Reynolds paused. "But Marcus was right about one thing. This is just the beginning." Sarah nodded, her mind still processing Marcus's final words. What had her grandmother hidden that even Marcus's organization couldn't find? Detective Morrison joined them, his expression grim. "Sarah, we found something else in the warehouse. A room Marcus was using as his personal office." He handed her a manila folder. "These were in a safe." Sarah opened the folder with her good hand. Inside were photographs of the cabin, but they looked old, from the 1940s or 1950s. There were also architectural drawings, showing the cabin's layout in detail, but what caught her attention was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the drawings. The note was in Chinese characters, followed by English translation in her grandmother's careful handwriting. "The mountain remembers what the valley forgets. When the snow melts, the truth rises." "There's more," Morrison said quietly. "We found correspondence between Marcus and someone called the Collector. Looks like Marcus was just middle management. The real power behind this operation is still out there." Sarah stared at the photographs, her mind racing. Her grandmother had been more clever than anyone realized. The deed to the cabin hadn't just been about exposing Marcus's network, it had been about leading Sarah to something even bigger. "I need to get back to the cabin," she said suddenly. Reynolds frowned. "Sarah, you've been shot. You need rest, medical care." "My grandmother left me a message," Sarah interrupted, holding up the note. "She's telling me there's more to find. And if this collector is still out there, we need to find it first." The paramedic finished with her bandages, and Sarah stood, determination overriding her exhaustion. Whatever her grandmother had hidden, whatever secret had been worth dying for, Sarah would uncover it. The truth was still waiting in the mountains. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabin's weathered porch as Sarah stood with the metal box cradled in her arms, its contents finally revealed after 17 chapters of mystery and terror. Detective Morrison emerged from his patrol car, followed by Agent Rivera from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The Blackwood Corporation's reign of intimidation was about to end. "The documents are all here," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. Grandmother Chen kept meticulous records. Property deeds, mineral rights, correspondence with Blackwood's lawyers dating back 40 years. They've been stealing from dozens of families. Rivera examined the papers with practiced efficiency. "These mining rights alone are worth hundreds of millions. Your grandmother was sitting on one of the largest rare earth deposits in North America." He looked up at Sarah with newfound respect. She knew exactly what she was protecting. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. For weeks, she'd believed her grandmother had abandoned the family, disappearing without explanation when Sarah's father was just a child. Now she understood the truth. Mei Chen had sacrificed everything to keep this legacy safe, living in isolation to protect not just her own family, but countless others from Blackwood's greed. Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Units are in position at Blackwood headquarters. We've got warrants for Marcus Blackwood and 6 of his executives. When you give the signal, we move." Sarah felt a wave of satisfaction mixed with sorrow. Marcus Blackwood, the man who had terrorized her, killed Tom Bradley, and destroyed so many lives in his quest for wealth, would finally face justice. But it couldn't bring back Tom, couldn't undo the fear she'd lived with, couldn't give her back the grandmother she'd never had the chance to know. "There's something else," Sarah said, pulling out a leather journal from the bottom of the box. "Grandmother's diary. She writes about a network, other families with similar claims that Blackwood has been systematically suppressing. The Chen property was just the beginning." Rivera's eyes lit up. This could unravel the entire operation. Corporate fraud, conspiracy, murder. We're talking about life sentences. As if summoned by their words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the forest. Sarah tensed, memories of previous attacks flooding back, but Morrison raised a calming hand. "That's our backup. Blackwood's people are in custody, but we're not taking any chances." 2 more patrol cars emerged from the tree line, followed by a black SUV. The cavalry had arrived, but Sarah felt strangely hollow. The danger was over, the mystery solved, but the victory felt incomplete. She thought of her father, who had spent his entire life wondering why his mother had abandoned him. He'd died never knowing she had been protecting him. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as agents began cataloging evidence and securing the scene. "Now we rebuild," Rivera said. "The mining rights revert to their rightful owners, you and the other families. Blackwood Corporation will be dissolved, its assets distributed as restitution. It won't happen overnight, but justice will be served." Sarah walked to the cabin's edge, looking out over the forest that had been her sanctuary and prison these past weeks. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the creek where Tom Bradley had first shown her the survey markers that had started this entire ordeal. His death still weighed heavily on her conscience, even though she knew Blackwood was responsible. Sarah Morrison approached, holding an envelope. "We found this in Blackwood's office safe. It's addressed to you." The envelope was thick, expensive paper, with her name written in an elegant script she recognized from the journal, her grandmother's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened it. "My dearest granddaughter," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my precautions have failed, and the truth has finally come to light. I know you must have questions about my choices, about why I stayed away from the family I loved more than life itself. Please understand that every day of separation was agony, but it was the only way to keep you safe." Sarah's vision blurred as she continued reading. Her grandmother had known about Blackwood's surveillance, had anticipated the danger that would come when she was no longer alive to guard the secret. The cabin, the hidden documents, even the specific way the deed had been delivered, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to ensure Sarah would discover the truth while staying alive long enough to expose it. "I am proud of the woman you have become," the letter concluded, "and I pray you will forgive an old woman's difficult choices. The Chen family legacy is now in your hands. Use it wisely, use it with honor, and know that your grandmother's love was with you always." Sarah folded the letter carefully, a sense of peace finally settling over her. The mystery was solved, the danger past, but more importantly, she finally understood that she had never been abandoned. She had been protected by a love so fierce it had bridged decades of separation. The fortune was hers now, but the real treasure was the truth.